G'day, gang. I want to talk today about my genre, my published genre. Why am I sitting like a weirdo? I want to talk today about the fantasy genre. I think it's a really weird genre. Genuinely is. Like, why do we take the most horrific time in recorded or understood human history and decide that's the time in which that we're going to make magical and beautiful? Why do we do this? Where did this come from? And why is it the most saturated genre? What is going on here? It is completely bizarre to me. And I think that the reason that we do that is also completely understood to me. So I talked a lot about the horror genre. I talked about how in moments when things are the darkest, that things can also be the brightest. And I think that's why we really are drawn to the medieval or the dark ages to fulfill these fantasies of magic and extraordinary things. Because not only was there rumors of witchcraft and wizardry and all of these complicated things happening behind the scenes against the church, it was also a really grim but really beautiful time. And I think that we can see that there are so many things that originated at this point in history. The fall of the Roman Empire and numerous other historic events are heavy elements that completely recolor this point in history and reframe it. And I think that that is some of the beauty of this genre, and that is some of the beauty of this time in history, which is very easy for me to say in the modern era, calling the Dark Ages beautiful. But I think too, the dawning of the Iron Age and just the drastic sweeping changes that actually happened in this era because of, again, the fall of the Roman Empire, it's something that I don't think we really talk about enough in the fantasy genre. So I think you do see it talked about in as kind of like in the side, talked about, I can't think of the word, but we talk about it in passing, because we talk about apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic settings in the fantasy genre, which in itself is pretty apocalyptic, given that they had all of these technologies that were available that suddenly started to become lost, and all of these advantages that were starting to become all of these advantages that were starting to populate smaller cities and stuff like that, brought about by the Roman Empire, that was bringing civility to what was otherwise pretty barbaric place. Then suddenly the fall of that is pretty apocalyptic. It's pretty cataclysmic. And the tools that was used by the Roman Empire for conquest, in terms of religion, like their religious conquest, now the fallout of that just decimated Europe. And I think that these elements interplayed into these adding magic back into the world, or having magic, always have been there, just completely reshapes and changes a point in history that was particularly complicated. And I think that's why it's such an appealing genre. Buddy, this is my favorite. I'm sorry, I'm so embarrassed. I'm not, I'm being silly. But the, all of those elements were really critical to the genre, and I think that having little pieces of those in different stories is really powerful. And I think I've just written, I talk about it in a few videos, a horror fantasy series that's apocalyptic, and it's really fun. They talk about how they're living in a city that they don't understand because the inhabitants are long gone. Bro, it is not playtime. play quietly in the corner. Silly boys. But it's this is going to be the most scuffed video, and it's my favorite. It's my genre. Sorry, oh my gosh. The coughing is real. And gross sounding. So I'm not going to subject you to that. I'm muting for that. Not my cats, but back to it. I'm not reshooting this. No. I've said too many things that are important. So, and I have the memory of a soup strainer, and I'm not going to remember. And I don't want to write a script unless it's for a specific breakdown of a piece of art or entertainment. And I think I'm going to do a lot more videos on the fantasy genre. I'm going to break down more elements about why it's so important. And I think too, there are genres that have specific hallmarks. Like the vampire genre, for example, has like some of the most, I think, obvious markers. And it's so easy to define, such as you have this hunger, and you have the seduction element, and you have this power imbalance. So all of those sorts of things are naturally part of that genre, and they don't have to be interplayed in the same way. A lot of them you can downplay some, upgrade others, move them around, shuffle them, or reshape them, or exclude them. But those elements exist, and in fantasy, the lack of technology is a big one. Technology as magic as replacement of technology is a big one. So having technological advancements be magical, which is currently a massive thematic element in the book that I'm currently writing. It's very fun to have them exploring this completely. I'm watching a civil war over here. We are battling for turf, and constantly distracting my line of thought, which is already sleepy. But I think these elements of exploring lost worlds and finding technology that's been lost to time, I think is very, very cool, because that's, I think, how a lot of people would have felt about the Roman Empire. And I think they would have had really complicated thoughts about that too, because while obviously it's made drastically more extreme in a story, because that's what we do, but particularly so in fantasy. The fantastic elements are quite extreme, and that's the reason that I talked about the vampire genre, because it's a subset of fantasy. Fantasy, I should have said this at the start, I'm too excited. I'm sorry, I'm too excited. The fantasy genre is basically anything that encompasses supernatural or magical elements. So it is huge category of works. What are you gonna do? It's a huge category of works, and is this just? I'm just gonna name this the cat video, buddy. Come sit on me. Come be pet. I don't want to cut. I'm stupid with editing. Okay. Oh my god, he's so heavy. Oh my gosh. Okay, so. Fantasy genre is massive, absolutely massive. It encompasses so many different types of genres under it. It's a blanket term. And we talk about fantasy, and we kind of mean the Tolkien-esque fantasy, but we can also mean the original fantasies of like a huge, again, massive list of beautiful works. And Arcane, for example, is considered a fantasy work because it has those magic elements. And that's modern day, so you think about fantasy, you don't typically think about modern day. And there are two terms that get used incorrectly in fantasy, being high fantasy and low fantasy. People seem to think that high fantasy means high magic, but Harry Potter is low fantasy and Lord of the Rings is high fantasy. One has low magic, one has high magic. It's specifically relative to the difference in comparison to Earth. So high fantasy is a wondrous world that's completely different from Earth and full of elements that are cultures that are different, cities that are different, populace that are different, all of those sorts of fantastical elements, different races, different types of people. All of those things are not Earth-like, thus it is not it's high fantasy. And Harry Potter is low fantasy. Another word for low fantasy is intrusion fantasy. So you have intrusive little elements of fantasy in an otherwise normal world. You know, vampires being a really good example of that type of fantasy. But this genre is so big, and it's because it's my genre, a genre I've published 3 books on, written 9 books that are ready to be published, because this series I'm determined to traditionally publish. I'm pretty experienced in understanding the specific elements about it, but ultimately it's still a huge amount of opinion and perspective, as is all with art and entertainment. That's always going to be the case. But because of how big this topic is, this isn't going to be the first video, so I'm not too I'm not too concerned about the fact that I spent most of it looking at my crazy animals. But what do you guys want specifically for me to talk about in the fantasy genre? I'm really excited about this topic. Again, I'm going to revisit it. It's my boo. All right, I'm coming back here. So what do you like about the fantasy genre? What do you hate about the fantasy genre? What do you think that's done poorly? For me personally, there are so many examples of what's done particularly badly, and I think onboarding is one of the worst examples, and I myself have done terribly with this in my my bug series, starting with the Legends That Bleed. It's terrible in the sense that way too many fantastical elements way early on, and it makes it very difficult to integrate into the series. The classic and beautiful, flawless example of doing this effortlessly and easy, Lord of the Rings. You have this little character from a little isolated pocket of happiness swept away into this fantastic world, and everything has to be explained to him because he's been isolated. Flawless onboarding. It's perfect. Having a character that's new to something, explain something is a great way to do that. Tolkien was a master, an absolute master, and I don't think anyone's opinion will ever change my opinion of that. I am envious of his memory, to be fair. If you have the type of memory in which that you forget almost nothing, I'm always going to be envious of that as a writer. But regardless, he was a very, very skilled individual, very insightful and very interesting person. And what do you guys think about the fantasy genre? Like, comment, and as always, please, if you want more of my content, subbing to my channel means the world. I was hoping to hold that to the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.